Does X mark the spot where we'll dig Twitter's grave?
And has Samsung unfolded exciting foldable phones at its Galaxy Unpacked event?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Uniden Australia. Hey there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award-winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as usual by Alex Kidman. Now, Alex, I see that Spotify is the latest streaming service to bump up its pricing by a few bucks a month. How far does your streaming budget stretch these days, and what would be the first one to go if inflation starts to bite too hard?
See, I have this wonderful anti-inflationary measure when it comes to music streaming. It's called buying CDs and ripping them to a home NAS because that's 100% legal, baby.
You are so old.
I am old, but it works and it does what I need it to do. And then I don't have to particularly worry about music streaming services. Otherwise, I just do what, I think I've said this before on the show, actually. I just cycle through services. I'll have a month of Netflix here, a month of Disney there, and you get to see everything when you've got the time to see it. You get good value out of it, and you don't spend a fortune. It's a win-win-win.
You're just waiting for Prince to launch that streaming service, just the Prince entire back catalogue, and that'll be all you'd need.
If Prince launched it, it would fail to appear for 3 months, then work beautifully for 1 month, then they'd pull the entire catalogue and launch a completely different thing the month after. That's the way the man worked. But spoiler, Prince isn't launching much of anything these days, Adam. You might want to look into why that is.
True that. So speaking of spoilers, we're joined once again by the Age Sydney Morning Herald tech editor, Tim Biggs. Tim, welcome back.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
So where does your streaming budget go these days, and what would get the chop?
Well, in terms of video streaming, I'm much the same as Alex. I kind of just bounce around. I always have Disney, but I'll sort of move around between the others. I just dropped Binge because I couldn't handle the streaming quality. Every time we watch something on it, I just was tearing my hair out. But on music, I stick with Spotify, and that's just basically because I can't be bothered. I stick with
the lazy tax,
and we've got that the 2-person thing at the moment, which is going up by a couple of dollars, which stings. But I'm locked in now. I've got to pay it.
And you got kids, right? So eventually you end up coughing up for the 6-person service.
Yeah, I'm resisting it at the moment, and it's that thing where they mostly do their music by talking to Google, and it'll just do whatever it feels like most of the time. Sometimes it cuts off my music. Sometimes it starts controlling my wife's music when she's not even in the house, and we just sort of don't understand it. Just have to say, okay, no music for today. Everyone stop. It's doing weird stuff.
So Tim's here to talk social media about the artist formerly known as Twitter. But before we get excited about that, Alex wrote that line, and he wrote all the other X puns as well, let's be honest.
Guilty.
Samsung this week wanted everyone to get excited about new foldables, wearables, and tablets at its latest Galaxy Unpacked event in Seoul. So we caught up with Gadget Guy editor Chris Button to talk about all things Samsung.
So this week saw yet another Galaxy Unpacked event, and like just about every other Galaxy Unpacked event I can think of for the last 5 years, an awful lot of what Samsung was going to reveal at the show was leaked beforehand, but also shown off to a select group of journalists. I was one of them, and our guest at this time was another. From Gadget Guy, it's Chris Button. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
You're more than welcome. So the big lad of phones that Samsung announced at Galaxy Unpacked was the Galaxy Z Fold 5. What were your impressions of the new Fold, if it is indeed new?
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of iterations over previous models. Nothing drastically different with the Fold this year. But Samsung did say that there was a reduced crease, albeit it's still definitely noticeable. But when you look at it front on, unfolded, it's not really much of an issue. It's only really when you're putting it at an angle and deliberately looking for the crease that it really pops out. But I did really enjoy the multitasking features with it, in particular the ability to have 2 app windows open drag and drop content from one into the other. As someone who does a lot of day-to-day messing around with images in one program and text in another, that would be something I could reasonably see as being part of my day-to-day workflow. So I really like that, and really love, like with the Flip 5 as well, that the Fold 5 now sits nice and flush with the hinge. So it looks a lot neater when folded up, which I'm sure, Alex, you would have experienced much the same with your hands-on.
Yeah, so I mean, the engineering of this thing is interesting because, as you say, the hinge is a bit better. It's a bit thinner. Off the top of my head, I think they said it was about 2 millimeters thinner, which doesn't sound like much. And it's a weird thing because it felt to me like, okay, if you were really au fait with the prior models, which I am, but a lot of people would not be, you might not really pick that 2 millimeter difference. But there is still engineering in there. There is still some work in there. Probably the biggest physical change that actually hit me was not really to do with the fold itself. It's to do with the new S Pen they've got with it, or as I like to call it, the S Stick. Because for those who are not aware, you can get, it's not in the box, an S Pen that's Samsung's particular stylus brand, but their stylus basically. But you have to get a specific one for the fold devices because of that flexible screen. If you try and use an older S Pen from like an old Note or whatever, then it won't work. It'll actually say, hey, this isn't compatible, because you run the risk of scratching the screen. Their previous solution to this was this case, and I've got one of them for an older fold model, where the S Pen kind of slots in on the side and it's this huge, bulky thing. The new S Pen is this incredibly flat thing that sits on the front of that case. It's a much, much better solution.
Yeah, certainly. It's nice that, almost in line with the hinge sitting more flush, that they've also made sure that the accompanying stylus also sits flush with that really nice case, so that, Samsung spoke a lot about pocketability with its new folding phones, and it's something that they've been going on about for a little while now. And you can see that really extends to what they're doing with the Fold, and also holistically with the S Pen as well. The fact that it won't stick out, uncomfortably, so that when you put it in your pocket, it's going to get caught on the edge of your pocket and pop out or break or whatever. So it's something they've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into the design there. So I agree that is another big plus for what they've done with the Fold 5, or more specifically the S Pen this time around.
For the Fold 5, it has kind of an odd specific naming.
So going by naming conventions, I'm taking it this is the fifth iteration of this. When we see previous things have come along, like touchscreen smartphones and stuff, the first few you see a lot of changes. They're sort of working out the kinks, figuring out what works, what doesn't, and then it settles down, and you just get these like slighter iterations. Chris, where do you think we are in that life cycle with the Fold?
Yeah, it's definitely, from one year to the next, it is very much that minor iterative stage. So I would say arguably the bigger changes to the Fold this year around are more internally, in terms of brighter, better display. It's got the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy processor as well. So they're claiming that there's more performance and bigger cooling chamber as well, which will help if you use it for a gaming device as well, so that it shouldn't get as hot in your hand, and hopefully the battery will last a bit longer as well. But I definitely think this year there's been a bigger jump with the Flip 5 than there has been the Fold 5, especially on first glance.
Yeah, I want to get into the Flip in a second, but I've got to say, in a sense, I feel as though Samsung is somewhat resting on its laurels here because it can, especially locally, in this larger phone form factor. So for those who are not particularly aware, the Fold is their foldable, which starts out looking like a regular phone from the front, and you unfold it, you open it like a book, basically, and it becomes a little mini tablet. And I'm a Fold guy. I prefer the Fold to the Flip, and I've long said that, and I stand by that. But they don't have any competition locally. The only real significant competition they've got, I would say, is in the Chinese market, and the Chinese specific market, the likes of Huawei and so on. And they had a bit of a tilt a few years ago with their Mate X and XS phones and so on, but not so much anymore. No one else is competing with them, though, are they, Chris?
Yeah, because here in Australia, we don't have the Google Fold, which
Mm.
was announced not that long ago. We don't have Oppo's Fold. We've got their flip phone here in Australia, but we don't have their Fold. So there's certainly less urgency for Samsung to really go gung ho in terms of cranking out the innovations for its sort of book-like foldable format as opposed to the flip phone format, which, yeah, there's clearly a lot more competition, especially locally here in Australia, where there's much more, there's more brands participating in that market.
Well, why is it that we're getting more flips here, or are they just more flips in general? Is it because they're more popular, or is it a supply chain thing where the folds are harder to make?
It's interesting. Alex, I might get you to jog my memory here, but I remember in some of the briefings that we had around the new technology that Australia is a little bit of an anomaly in the worldwide market in terms of foldables, in terms of that the fold has outsold the flip so far in Australia. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think that is the correct claim, yes, but you're right. I think the answer to this, though, is a lot simpler, Adam, and it's to do with the fact that the Fold is not exactly inexpensive. The starting price on this thing is $2,599 for a phone. It's the most expensive phone that Samsung has.
So it's more expensive than the flip equivalent.
Oh, considerably
yes.
so.
Yeah, okay.
Considerably
That explains
so.
it.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where the competition comes from, because they figure they can shift more units. Not that the flip phones, which I think we should shift to, are exactly inexpensive. But Chris, what's the big change here? Because there is I would argue there is one big significant change between the Flip 5 and the last year's Flip 4.
Yeah, certainly, and that's in the form of the cover screen, which it's immediately visible when you see the phone that the cover screen is now, off the top of my head, 3.4 inches up
Yep.
from, I believe the Flip 4 was 1.9 inches or around that mark. So along with what Oppo and Motorola have done in recent months, making the cover screen bigger and bigger. And mind you, the Flip 5 cover screen isn't as big as the Razr 40 Ultra, but it's pretty close, with sort of like an angular cutout just around the camera and torch array. But yeah, so the big difference there with the Flip 5 is that it's got the larger cover screen, which enables more widgets, more customization, gives you a larger camera preview when you're using that main camera array. And arguably one of the biggest ones is if you're replying to messages or you want to respond to an email, you've got access to a full QWERTY keyboard. So you don't have to rely on pre-generated preset messages to quickly respond without opening the phone.
This idea of a secondary screen has been kicking around for a long time. Obviously, much smaller and a lower resolution. But have they actually found a good use for these things? Do you think that the QWERTY keyboard for the full replies is the use case that it's been waiting for? Maybe.
I don't think it's the killer app as such. I think it's handy and very helpful if you just want to do a quick one-sentence reply to someone. But if you wanted to type an essay in response, then you're probably better off just opening the dang thing up and using the full screen keyboard. But I think I've been skeptical is probably too strong a word, but I've been a little bit wary of the flip phone format, thinking, is this just a bit of a fad? Is this just a bit of a novelty? Because I've long loved the look of them because they look great. They look stylish and really sleek, but I've wondered what the use case is. And on a slight tangent, I've actually been testing out the Motorola Razr 40 recently for Gadget Guy. So not the Ultra model with the larger screen, but the sort of $999 model that has the sort of the older, I suppose, classical cover screen. If you want to look at sort of the history
the
of what
Motorola
they've been
take
doing.
on the Flip 4. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, that's a fair way of looking at it. And having used it for a week and a bit now, I can see the appeal much clearer now. And I think Samsung's doing a reasonably good job of positioning who the Flip 5 and by extension flip phones are for. They're for younger people who enjoy content creation, enjoy taking selfies and taking a lot of photos, but more easily being able to use the main camera to do so, the best camera to take selfies, the best camera to set up as a pseudo tripod without needing any extra equipment to film reels, film TikToks, take photos, that sort of thing. And I think that the use case there is really, really helpful for people who are really into content creation. How big the content creation market is, wanting to purchase a phone specifically for that, I don't know. I'd have to look into whatever marketing data is available there, but the appeal is certainly there for that particular segment.
You say, I mean, I want to clarify on this. You say the best camera, it's the best camera that is on this phone. It's
Sure,
because
yes, yes.
The rear cameras, which become the front cameras, it's always difficult when you talk about folding phones.
Yes.
Are the ones that end up on that cover display. But this actually brings up a point that annoys me with all foldables, because everyone does this. These are the most expensive phones that you can buy, but they don't have the best cameras that those companies make. If you want the best camera that Samsung makes, you buy an S23 Ultra, which will actually cost you about the same as the Flip 5, in fact. And the poor old Fold 5 actually has basically the same camera it did last year, which kind of blows my mind in a value sense. But there was one other thing, and you mentioned Motorola and the Razr 40. I'm doing the Razr 40 as well at the moment, but I've just done the Razr 40 Ultra, and people can look at my review of that. And the thing that captivated me with that, in a way that no flip phone has before, is that it will run full Android apps in that screen, in that cover screen. That's smaller. I think it's 3.6 inches on the Razr, and 3.6 to 3.4 is not that big. It's not something you'd really notice between the two of them without them being side by side. But while that doesn't work for every app, because not every app likes being that small, it means you can do just about everything. Samsung is just doing widgets. It's not doing apps at this point. I feel like that's a misstep on their part when one of their competitors is already there. What's your take, Chris?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's tricky for me to say without playing with the Razr 40 Ultra myself, because I haven't used the Ultra at all, let alone the Flip 5 I've had in my hand and had a little play with. But in theory, that does absolutely sound like a missed opportunity to have at least miniature versions of full Android apps, but perhaps I'm just theorizing here. Perhaps that's an optimization thing and not wanting to have an instance of you try and run a full Android app and it's clearly a far worse experience than running it natively on a traditional screen. Perhaps that's what Samsung's trying to avoid there. But again, that's just me theorizing, without having used the Razr Ultra in terms of being able to see how well it does those apps on the cover screen.
Oh, and to be fair and clear, it doesn't always do them brilliantly, but weirdly, Samsung has some of this experience and some of this data because it did it with the early Folds. The early Folds had those really tiny, thin, little, terrible screens, and the experience was not great, but it worked. It was there. Maybe they'll add it as software down the track, but I wouldn't bet on that, and I certainly wouldn't spend the money on that.
But this sort of comes down to that inconsistency in the Android store. And I think we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about tablets. In the Apple ecosystem, Apple can just say, right, this is the way we're doing it. You've got to make your app scale for this, this, and this. So if they brought out a foldable iPhone tomorrow with a little screen on the front, they would make sure all the apps work with it properly. But they can't really, they can encourage it, but they can't really enforce it on the Android store, can they?
Yeah. I suppose historically speaking, and Apple will always be the first to tell you how well they police, for lack of a better word, the App Store in making sure that it meets stringent standards. It works with whatever the sort of oldest iOS or OS they've got out at the moment, that it's compatible with that, and it meets however many standards it sets. Whereas I think for a long time now, we've always known that the Google Play Store and the Android sort of storefronts to be a bit of a wild west in terms of quality and quality assurance, testing, security, all of that. So I wonder, and perhaps this is more work than manufacturers or companies would want to put in, but whether, to use a gaming analogy, with games that operate on, say, like a portable device like a Steam Deck or an ROG Ally, where on the Steam store it will say Steam Deck verified. Whether there's something similar for, as the flip phone market expands, whether on the Android store there will be something that says optimized for cover screens or optimized for flip phone devices. But again, there's a fair bit of work that would need to go into that, I imagine.
I guess the other problem there as well, I mean, Google does have some guidelines for foldable phones and foldable apps and things like that. But I guess the problem there and the benefit in a way, or the advantage that Apple has, is typically it's talking about like maybe 6 or 7 different screen sizes at any one time that it's got to support, whereas Android is genuinely hundreds, if not thousands of resolution differences, size differences, foldables, all sorts of things to all sorts of people. You probably can't please everyone. It wasn't just phones, though, at Unpacked. Samsung's also got a range of new wearables, and the regular listeners will know that I'm a man who loves a smartwatch, probably a little bit too much, but it's still not illegal to do so. Chris, what was your take on the new Galaxy Watches?
Yes, so the Galaxy Watch 6 and the Galaxy Watch 6 Classic. So from my understanding, the Classic was not part of the Watch 5 range, so that's a bit of a returning favourite, that with the stainless steel finish. And they've gone for a slightly bigger display, slightly reduced bezel size, more brightness, a little bit more battery. But Samsung did spend a lot of time emphasizing that they've put a lot of time and effort into making sure that there's this really seamless wellness and health experience between your watch and your phone, or in fact, the ability to access Samsung Health without even opening the app on your phone or having your phone open. So you'll see in a lot of the promotional materials, they're going really big on sleep health and the ability to be able to string multiple workouts together and just be able to see data better at a glance, which for me, using a smartwatch, I've used an Apple Watch for a little while now, particularly for monitoring workouts. I really like the UI of what the Watch 6, how it sort of operates with the sort of the Samsung wrapper of the Google Wear OS sort of situation they've got. So my first impressions are pretty positive of the Watch 6 series.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you've buried the lead there. The thing that's got me the most excited about this is that there is a Watch 6 Classic, and for those not in the know, the Classic models are the ones that have a rotating bezel. So the entire bezel spins, and it's a control mechanism. You can actually flick through screens. You can make selections with it. It is, in my view, the single best thing that Samsung's ever done in a wearable. And I don't for the life of me understand why they do this TikTok thing where they go, oh, no, this year we're not doing a Classic. Next year we'll do a Classic. Okay, people don't change or shouldn't change their smartwatches all that frequently, but I want the rotating bezel to be there all the time. It's the single best reason to buy one of these, in my view.
Do you want it because it's like the concept of a traditional watch, like the diving watches that would have the rotating bezel? Or do you want it because it actually makes it easier to interact with the watch as a smartwatch?
So I'm not a diving watch kind of guy, Adam. I'm sure you're shocked by that revelation. But no, it's the ease of use. It's the fact that it is, again, my perspective, but I've tested a lot of smartwatches. It is the best selection mechanism I've hit for this kind of thing. So if you've used an Apple Watch, you'll be aware they've got that little digital crown on the side that you can spin, and that's okay. That works, that functions, and a few other manufacturers have gone down that road. This is like that, but much, much bigger, which means it's just so much easier if you're on the go to just go, right, I'm just going to put my palm over my watch and just spin it a little bit to, move through a screen or make a selection or, whatever it is you're contextually doing with it. And it works really, really well. It's just a smart bit of, ergonomic engineering, I suppose is the way I'd put it.
Yeah, that's one thing I'll really be keen to go hands-on with at some stage, because at the briefing before they made the announcements, that the Watch 6 was the one thing I didn't get to go hands-on with, but I do really like the sound of that rotating bezel because, as you say, the digital crown on the Apple Watch is totally fine, but I do feel like there could be a better way of interfacing with a smartwatch for sure.
The other big product that they announced, in fact, is very big and was not quite as heavily leaked as everything else. And I know you spent a bit of time playing around with the Tab S9 family, Chris. Tell me about them.
Yes, indeed. So, big upgrade to the tablet family for Samsung with the S9, the S9 Plus, and the S9 Ultra. I think one of the things that people are most excited about is that it's got the let me get this right, the dynamic AMOLED times 2x, whatever
2x, yep.
Samsung brands it as. So, very, very bold, bright, vibrant screens across all three devices. So it's not just restricted to the Ultra. It's, regardless of which model you get, it's got this really, really beautiful screen to view content on, to use as a note-taking device, or as is quite handy to use Samsung's DeX mode to connect it to an external display like a PC monitor and display content on that larger display while still using all of the tablet's core features separately. So there's a fair bit of flexibility in terms of a big use case that Samsung is pushing to position the Tab S9 as a potential laptop replacement or substitute.
The iPad Pro strategy without the Apple branding, in other words.
Pretty well, yeah.
So, I bring up the iPad Pro because these are, and Samsung, sorry, not Apple, Samsung does a lot of tablets, and it does a lot of much more affordable tablets. These are quite premium priced. I mean, you'd actually want, I would think, a work or a whole of life solution to come out of these things, especially for that bigger tablet, which off the top of my head, I think tips the scales at just under $2,000.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think the smallest one starts at about 1,100, 1,200, and then the smallest storage size of the Ultra is somewhere between 17 to 1,900. So yeah, it's a fair bit of coin for a tablet, that's for sure.
That's productivity tool pricing, though, isn't it? Well,
Yeah.
You keep it under $1,000, and I know I'm not saying $1,000 isn't a lot of money, but you keep it under $1,000, and you can talk about it as a consumer purchase. It's for sitting on the couch. It's for piss farting around with. It's maybe for the kids playing with. But up at $2,000, you've got to be using it to make money to get things done. Yes.
Yeah, you'd certainly want to get more use out of it than just watching Netflix on. Otherwise, that's a lot of money to be paying for a Netflix consumption device where you could pay almost a similar amount and get a half decent TV. But I think it's interesting with the pre-order situation at the moment. I did notice that with the Tab S9 series, that with pre-orders you do get the $200 or $300 sort of book cover keyboard folio sort of thing with it. So I think that's a reasonably good incentive for people who want to buy in early into the technology and especially use it as a productivity machine, that you are getting that keyboard accessory as well so that you can get full use out of it beyond using a digital keyboard on the screen, which is far less fun and reliable to use than an actual physical keyboard device. So, yeah, still a lot of money to be paying, but it's at least good that they seem to be considering that angle in terms of the way that they're pushing this to market. So, yeah, definitely want to be using this as something a bit more than just your entertainment. As you say, Adam, I can't put it better myself. Piss farting around the couch, really.
It's a big market.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the market, I guess it's probably an easier sell for Samsung in Australia because what they're not cannibalizing with this is any kind of laptop market. They've had little dilly-dalliances into laptops in Australia, but never a concerted push in that market. But they do actually have ultra-portable laptops and things that could compete against this in other markets where they're also selling the Tab S9. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they get out of that and whether or not consumers go for it.
Yeah, for sure, because I think it was just as recent as the previous Galaxy Unpacked where they revealed the S23 phones that I think overseas they did bring out their latest Ultrabooks or whatever they call them, which, of course, all the local information and sort of addendums from PR comes through and, not coming to Australia. Yeah. Well, I suppose, that's been the traditionally the case for a while. But as you say, it probably works out in favour for Samsung, the fact that they're just pushing the tablets as opposed to trying to pit tablets versus laptops against one another, which, I mean, it's a very crowded market, both the tablet and laptop market, and one that is struggling a bit at the moment in terms of reduced sales across the board. And that's where Samsung did say that, look, we know the market's not great, but people still seem to be responding to sort of quote unquote more premium products. So I suppose the proof will be in the pudding once the Tab S9 series arrives next month.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how all of that rolls out. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris.
Thank you so much. Lovely to have a chat.
And as we usually do around this time, when we're saying goodbye to a guest, you get your opportunity to promote where you work and where you are on social media. Go.
Yes, so I'm the editor at gadgetguy.com.au, doing a lot of consumer technology coverage. As far as social media, with how fragmented it is at the moment, I don't know what to promote, given I'm on Blue Sky, Threads, whatever the hell Twitter is. But if you search for Chris Button or Bibby Boy, that's BIBBYBHOY, you'll find me somewhere.
We might have something to say about the fragmentation of social media real soon now. Thanks for your time, Chris.
Thank you.
Enjoying the show? That's great. Don't forget to subscribe, which you can do on every podcast platform you've ever heard of. Just search for Vertical Hold or go to our website, verticalhold.com.au, where we've got handy buttons for every single podcast platform.
So, Tim, Elon Musk has long had this dream of creating this thing called X, and it seems to be coming to life. You call him a parasite in the paper. Why?
Well, I mean, to be clear, it's not my opinion that he, as a person, is a parasite. It's more in the context of Twitter, and in the context of, for months now we've been talking about, what are these new changes that Musk made every other week? There's a big thing that people are up in arms about. It seems he's just waking up and having his epiphanies and making everybody change it. And it's sort of, where are we going? Is Twitter going to be, I guess, rehabilitated? Is it going to be better? And, is he killing the service slowly? And it turns out that, no, I don't think he is. I think he is sort of using the service to create this X app. I don't think the question of, what is Musk doing to make Twitter better is the right question. He is simply using what Twitter has, i.e. a few million users remaining and, the back end and all the tech to jumpstart the development of X by a few years. So that's the context in which I think he could be seen as a parasite on Twitter. If Twitter is something that you enjoyed and you like and you would like to see return to its full strength, I think maybe the time for that has passed and we can look ahead at what it will become potentially in the future.
But to backpedal for just a second, we can't exactly, after this week, and this was Elon's particular brain fart this week, call it Twitter because it's now X or maybe 10 or whatever other sound he thinks it makes. He's changed the brand, hasn't he? It's not the blue bird that we all knew, and for those of us who have been around for way too long, the fail whale. It's X in a fairly kind of ugly and, as others have pointed out, possibly already copyrighted font.
I mean, it's a funny one because, this is on brand for Musk, I think, to, a lot of people, believe me, have come to me over the last week in various forums unexpectedly in the middle of the night to tell me how stupid I am, and that Mr. Musk has put forward a plan for X for years, and it's not surprising, and he's doing everything according to plan. But at the same time, you can't avoid the fact that he just said one day Twitter's now X. Clearly, nobody knew that was going to happen. People were running to try to get I don't even remember exactly what it's called, but that X that they use that's just a regular character in Unicode to put that at the top of the website and to try to take the word Twitter off the building and not have
But that's an amazing story in itself for those who don't know.
To have the police come basically and say, hey, we're not sure. Apparently, because the original story was that they didn't have the rights they didn't have the permission to bring in their heavy machinery and shut down a street in San Francisco and take down a sign. Yeah. I think what it turned out to be was that they did get permission, but it wasn't communicated properly to security or to the building owner or to anybody else. And so the police, came and shut it down. It just said ER on their, on their building for a while. But like, it may be part of his plan, but it's not the way that businesses usually function, where they would have had meetings where this was, communicated to other people. They would have had a plan of how to rebrand in a way that doesn't look ridiculous, where my, app still says Twitter all over it, still says tweet all over it, it's still got blue birds all over it, except for like a couple of spots where it's got an ugly X now. It's really haphazard. But, as I said, I don't think making a functional Twitter is necessarily the game plan. It's just about incrementally getting us to the place where he thinks X needs to be.
And he tried to pull this back in the PayPal days, didn't he?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty well documented that he's got a weird thing about X, and spelling sexy with a 3. I've noticed a number of times in the past has come up, and all the Tesla models, S3 XY, make sexy with a 3. And now one of the
because he's a 12-year-old.
I know. One of the Twitter conference centers is now called sexy with a 3. I don't know, but yeah, X in particular he's obsessed with. So yes, back in the day he had X.com and he tried to make the PayPal service into X. I think that may have been what got him kicked out of PayPal originally.
Pretty much. He did well. Okay. I want to say he did, and I think he did. I don't have proof of this, but he did effectively make new Twitter CEO. I guess she's now the ex-CEO, which means when she quits, she'll be the ex-CEO. She best
Looks good on a resume.
Yeah, she'd best not quit twice. That's all I'm going to say. Linda Yaccarino put out this amazing tweet with just the most corporate gibberish, and I desperately want to read it out for everyone.
Do it.
So bear with me. Deep breath. And this is what to do with what X is, apparently. And then we can dive into what it might mean. X is the future state of unlimited interactivity, centered in audio, video, messaging, payments / banking, creating a global marketplace for ideas, goods, services, and opportunities. Powered by AI, X will connect us all in ways we're just beginning to imagine. For years, fans and critics alike have pushed Twitter to dream bigger, to innovate faster, and to fulfill our great potential. There's absolutely no limit to this transformation. X will be the platform that can deliver, well, everything. Has Linda Yaccarino not heard of overpromising, Tim?
I mean, from that, I get that she is an ad person and she's been given very little to work with.
Yeah.
She's taken a few themes in there, such as people criticizing Twitter constantly and people not knowing what X is, and she's tried to formulate something that sounds like there's been meetings and there's been an understanding internally of what this is going to be, but I don't think that's really there. And saying something has, unlimited potential or will revolutionize communication or anything like that is pretty meaningless.
Well, people ask for two things: an edit button and get rid of the Nazis, and we haven't got either of those, have we?
I mean, people paying for Twitter Blue have one of those things.
True. And it's not get rid of the
more
Nazis.
Nazis.
Yeah.
Extra Nazis.
That's the part that they wanted.
Nazis for all. They've also got some big problems with this, though, because as almost everyone has pointed out, X, whilst it's a letter of the alphabet, and Sesame Street had its own fun with that this week, and when Sesame Street is dunking on you, you're in real trouble. You don't mess with Grover, that's all I'll say. But X as a trademark for exactly the kind of services that they're talking about there, it's already held by a whole bunch of different companies, most notably Microsoft and Meta. And of course, as we detailed in the show a few weeks ago, Zuckerberg and Musk, they don't really see eye to eye except possibly in a cage match coming soon, do they?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of problems with naming your product X. I think, part of the appeal of it maybe is that sort of, that it's so difficult and that it's so, exclusive. Only one person can have X. It's like when you're signing up for, names for new social media platforms and you want to get the one character to just be like, I was there, I did it first. But obviously he didn't do it first. And it's going to be difficult, I think. It's difficult from a branding perspective. It's difficult from, if I'm going to Google the thing or if I'm going to, have any sort of presence that I can see it and say that's definitely the Twitter thing, right? That's not any of the other dozen things that have X in them. And yeah, if there is a potential for Zuckerberg or Microsoft to come in and put a stop to it, obviously they're going to.
The X, it was in some countries, it actually got picked up by their porn filters because they block anything with X in the domain name or something like that.
I mean, possibly. I don't know if you'd
did.
block,
So
yeah.
this one I can answer.
The Philippines,
Indonesia blocked it because at one point, so Musk owned X.com, which then went to PayPal, and he did eventually buy it back off PayPal because he's, as you said, Tim, he's been obsessed with it for a while. But it was hosting, shall we say, certain material at one point, and the Indonesian government picked up on this and went, well, no, hang on, we're not having that. So Twitter was blocked. As I understand the story as it's emerging, it's one of those things where, again, there just wasn't communication to say, hey, no, look, this is actually Twitter. Twitter is allowable in Indonesia, but it got automatically filtered. And absolutely, I mean, I've done radio this week where people have said to me, well, hang on, doesn't that all mean it's a bit pornographic? And it's like, well, no more than it was already. But
yes,
it's not a good look.
Yes, it is substantially pornographic. And having X as the little favicon website icon also, it looks bad. It looks bad in the tabs.
This, of course, the change over to X though raises this kind of big question. If it's not Twitter, then we're not tweeting anymore. What is it that we're doing on X? What do we call postings on X?
Didn't Musk say that the messages were X's now? I don't know how would you would use that in a sentence. You can't say I sent an X, I was Xing, re-X. Doesn't really work very well.
Might have been Zeeting. Was it
Zeeting?
X-double-E-T? I'll zeet you. I'll zeet you later.
I mean, I like it.
The two I've seen is that it's either meant to be a kiss, the kind of classical X thing at the end of a letter or whatever, or depending on your viewpoint of the service, that you're now excreting.
It's a good one.
It really feels like Brewster's Millions, except he's pissing away billions. I don't know, Tim. Are you old enough to remember the movie Brewster's Millions?
I mean, I've seen it. I don't have a memory of it coming to cinemas or anything.
Plot was that. Oh, what's the guy's name?
That they wanted to pay Richard Pryor way too much money to be in a very bland comedy. But go
Richard Pryor inherited some money, but to inherit the full amount, he had to piss away $30 million in 30 days or something like that without explaining to anybody what he was doing. So he was doing the most insane things, making the worst possible decisions to get rid of this money. So I'm wondering how many trillions of dollars Elon's going to get if he manages to piss away all of his money in this certain time frame. Because it's just crazy.
I mean, look, it's a guilty pleasure of mine to go to Elon Musk's profile on Twitter and just look at the replies and despair. And I think, you can't, none of us can really know what he's like personally. And he clearly has a lot of skills and a lot of intelligence in certain areas, but he's also a strange person. And I don't think we can really predict how much money he is, able to sink into something like this if it means a lot to him personally, especially if he does have, he said that X could control like half of the world's finances eventually and will be the most profitable company in the world. And that sounds completely ridiculous, but also, there's stranger things have happened.
But also, Adam's still waiting on his Cybertruck.
Yes, he's got a history of making stupid promises. Like for the last 5 or 6 years, every year he says, next year we'll get level 5 full autonomy from Tesla cars. And they're still on about 2. So he just keeps saying things with no accountability, perhaps whether or not he believes those things are actually going to happen. But I guess the bigger question is this everything app. It's the opposite of the Seinfeld app, which would be the app about nothing. This is the app about everything. What does an everything app look like?
Well, I mean, in China, for example, they have the WeChat app, which sort of integrates with everything. You can do payments through it. You can do messaging through it. You can do shopping through it. And I think that's the kind of thing that he's aiming for. I think the difficulty in America and in the rest of the Western world is that we already have lots of established financial mechanisms. We have big banks that operate online. We have things like Amazon. It's tough to imagine a situation where Elon Musk can create an Amazon competitor of his own and create a financial apparatus of his own. Short of buying, Square and buying, a bank and doing it that way, it's hard to imagine. But eventually, maybe it could be that sort of portal to the internet. Whether anyone wants that, we've seen others try it by adding, extra bits onto Facebook Messenger, for example. Like, instead of going to a store, why don't I just talk to the Nike bot in Facebook Messenger? Because it's dumb and I don't want to do that. But eventually in the future, we could see something like that.
But he'd also have, I mean, it's not just, you're right, he's got to take on the banks, he's got to take on the Amazons and all the rest of it. He's also got to take on an absolute brick wall of regulation that already exists, especially in the finance space. And I mean, what he's shown with Twitter already, Twitter's in trouble in so many countries for not having good contact policies, not having good protection policies or takedown policies, for the fact that he basically fired everyone who did all of those functions when he took over. He's not exactly showing that he can work well with regulators. I can't see this happening. I can see so many barriers to it ever being able to even start, let alone pick up the kind of mass quantity that you need for those kinds of apps to be really successful.
Yeah, it's similar to the self-driving cars in that you can say that this could potentially happen or we can do this technically, but then, every regulator in the world is going to say, actually, you can't do that. Not in this country. We're not going to allow it. And, I guess from his perspective, he just has to hope that, he can wear them down or get around it somehow. But yeah, it does seem like an extraordinary uphill battle.
He needs to buy a country and then take over that country and change it into what he wants it to be. That's the obvious answer.
Yeah.
Stunned silence, because that's about as smart as the rest of his plans.
What you can't hear is the screaming noise in the back of my head that is now going to be running for like 24 hours at least, Adam. Thank you for that. I'm not going to sleep for like a week.
People would live there. I've seen them. In those replies.
That is scary. What I thought was really insane this week is because we've got all these other people chipping away at, I said a couple of weeks ago, the carcass of Twitter, and it seems more and more reasonable, actually, every time I think about it. You've got Threads, you've got others. TikTok has just come out and said it's going to allow text-only posts of up to 1,000 words. Is that insane? Like, I'm not a big TikTok user, but that's not what TikTok's about, is it?
Yeah, it's getting a bit weird. It was weird even when Threads came out, and sort of you've got Facebook or you've got Meta saying, from now on we're going to have an Instagram where you can write things. And it's like, wow, it seems
what a breakthrough.
It seems to have gone backwards in that way. But I mean, we're seeing more and more people be interested in newsletters, for example. I think maybe there is going to be a future for people consuming those things however they want. And, maybe if you're producing, podcast content like this in the future, you'll have the option of, you've got your AI, you can automatically transcribe it into text, put it on TikTok, and people can go through. And if that's how they want to consume their content, that's how they'll consume it.
The weird thing
AI transcription will have to get better because I've thrown our podcast at it, and it comes out as vertical hole every time, and that is that's unfortunate.
A very different podcast.
Yeah, it's a very different podcast.
That'll get blocked in Indonesia.
Yeah, for sure.
The thing with the Twitter carcass, though, that might save Elon, and again, that screaming is happening in the back of my head, is that you've got all these things. You've got Threads and Blue Sky's still invite only, and Mastodon's there, but it's a bit inscrutable if you don't know what you're doing. And they all exist, but no one seems to be getting that breakthrough moment. It looked like Threads was going to do it, but all the reporting suggests that they had a huge sign up, but they've now seen a massive tumble in actual engagement, and the people going, right, this is actually what I do all day long. This is my doom scroller of choice. Tim, do you reckon there's odds that Twitter might just outlive them simply by dint of already being there in people's minds?
I mean, it's definitely a huge advantage, right? If you need to, pick up and move to a new place, you can take all your stuff with you, but when you get there, the people that you're used to seeing aren't necessarily there. You can go to Threads and you can say, okay, I'll follow all my Instagram people, but the people that you've been following it on Twitter for 10 years, might not be there, or they might be doing different stuff, and it's become fragmented as well. Where if you're leaving Twitter, you might be going to Threads, but you might also be going to Blue Sky, or you might be going somewhere else. So I think, in the short term, it's going to continue that way, right? Everybody's going to go out and make these profiles on the competitors, but they're going to stay at Twitter, and that's going to be their primary doom scrolling thing. And I think it might take a breakthrough like, this sort of federated networks that we keep hearing about, where, if there's a handful of them and they all work together so that it doesn't matter if a third of your Twitter people have gone to one and a third have gone to the other, you'll be able to interact with them all. That's, a little bit in the future, but I think it's going to take something like that to really get people to not just sign up elsewhere, but leave Twitter and not be there anymore.
Well, that just about wraps up this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Tim for joining us this week.
Thanks, guys.
And now I'd like to mix things up a bit, because I always like to do this because it makes Adam panic, and making Adam panic makes me smile. Tim, I'd usually ask you the 3 questions of doom. I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to give you the opportunity to promote your work however you'd like, writing, podcasts, newsletters, whatever you like, for about 30 seconds, as well as telling our listeners what they should have for lunch tomorrow.
Perfect. Well, you should have a falafel, and you should make it yourself. Don't go to the shop and buy a falafel. Go and get some good falafel, get some good Turkish bread, and do that. And get some good sweet chili sauce. For myself, you can find me on Twitter, still there, on X. Read the X tweets, whatever they're called that I'm putting out. And there you'll find links to my newsletter that I do at the SMH and the Age, which you should get. It comes out every week on a Friday. There's also a newsletter I do on my own time with Alice Clark. It's called Press Any Button. It's about video games and other nerdy stuff that we like.
You should definitely go and subscribe to Press Any Button. It is excellent, and I heartily recommend it. And I also heartily recommend that our listeners catch up with us online. We're also still on Twitter /X as Vertical Hold AU. You can also catch us on the Vertical Hold Facebook page, on Instagram, or online at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everyone for dropping by. Don't forget to drop us a line. Let us know what you think about Twitter turning into X. Let us know what you think about the new Samsung gear, and just let us know what you think about the podcast. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Uniden Australia.